evening, campers, it's me, Kieran. Today we are going to talk about the sequel to The Morning Star, The Wolves of Eternity by Karl Ove Knausgaard. And if you don't know anything about The Morning Star, I will link my review of it down below. Please watch that before watching this one. Have you watched it? Good. You wouldn't know that this was a sequel to The Morning Star. Okay, it kind of crops in right at the end like a slither. Throughout reading this, I really had a doubt that I had made it up that this was a sequel, even though the inside tells you that it's the sequel to The Morning Star. Also, go to your library, save yourself 25 quid. Even despite the fact that the back mentions The Morning Star, Brandon Taylor says that he read The Morning Star compulsively and stayed awake all night after finishing it. I can guarantee that Brandon Taylor, reading The Wolves of Eternity, put it down and thought to himself, why on earth have I waited 1.5 years for this? Allow me to preface this by saying I am fully aware that the next words to utter out of my mouth is going to be ridiculous if you've read anything by Knausgaard. So I'm going to say it. This book is really long and talks about nothing. If you've not read any Knausgaard, you might think that's a valid criticism. If you've read Knausgaard, as I have, I've read all of My Struggle, and I'll link that down below, you might think that's exactly what you expect from Knausgaard. No, people, Knausgaard fans, let me tell you, this book is really long and talks about nothing. I have to come clean. After reading 6,000 pages of this man's work, I can appreciate when his confinement, not in the way of his minimalism like his contemporary Jon Fosse, but in the way that he is so confined to a scene that he's unable to let go of it until he's told you every minute detail that character does, even if it's to tell you how butter moves across a piece of bread. I'm kind of all for it, but The Wolves of Eternity has stretched this to an exercise that I don't think pays off in any way, shape or form. Now, I was expecting something akin to its predecessor, The Morning Star, where we have a corral of characters and we flit in between and see how these stories begin to, if not interlink, but to interrelate to one another. The Wolves of Eternity pretty much follows two characters. We spent 400 pages with Sivert and the remainder majority with Alevtina. There are some other characters who intersperse, but Alevtina and Sivert definitely have the bulk of this 700-page novel. Set around the 1980s in Norway, just like its predecessor, Sivert has just finished his time with military service and therefore goes home, and we pretty much have the majority of his time just watching his mum shake her head and look at bills. And nothing happens. Sivert is trying to find his feet after leaving the military, and the only job he can get is as an undertaker. But all while this is not happening, there's a lot of time doing absolutely nothing in this book. Don't worry, Sivert, his father has passed away, and he didn't really know his father. But going through his letters, he realised there's some Russian, and that's where Alevtina comes into as we come into the 21st century. Alevtina is a biologist who's trying to understand the beginnings of life, and this is where we get The Wolves of Eternity from. Alevtina reads her friend Vasya's The Wolves to Eternity, which basically is a Russian treatise on we should be spending as much human potential as possible trying to figure out how to prolong our lives, how to ultimately beat death. Now, The Wolves of Eternity is borrowing off the work from Fyodorov, a Russian Orthodox visionary who thought that we could bring people back to life. And indeed, this does happen in The Morning Star. And Knausgaard throughout The Wolves of Eternity is not shy in borrowing from the Russians. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky crop up throughout this. How Sivert and Aleftina's story join up, I'll let you read for yourself. It's like the only interesting thing that happens in this damn book. While I won't divulge any information on that fact, it's definitely intriguing to understand why Knausgaard, through the first character we meet for a few short pages, Helga, witnesses the act that severs these two characters. The Wolves of Eternity feels like the latter part of his sexology, My Struggle, in the fact that it offers very little to the table and doesn't really go anywhere. I'm aware that this is a part of a overarching series, and the discussions about death and how we are moving away from the religious to the scientific and still finding quandaries with still finding ways of navigating what happens once we die is all intriguing, but it's surrounded by so much mundanity. It's covered and draped boring stodge that it begins to feel a tad self-indulgent. Again, this is Knausgaard. He wrote 6,000 pages about his own life. Of course he's self-indulgent. I can see purebred Knausgaard fans having a field day. He is offering everything that people hate about his work to the forefront with this book. I just don't think, following The Morning Star, it follows in any similar vein, apart from right at the end. This could have been a standalone. No one would know. I somewhat detest that I spent over 2 weeks reading this. And for that, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. You can go in the Testaments Club. 2 weeks.